The Nevada desert stretches out, an endless canvas of sun-baked earth and scrub brush, a landscape that whispers of forgotten stories. Its beauty is deceptive, a mask for secrets buried deep beneath the shifting sands. It's a place where the sun beats down relentlessly, where time seems to slow to a crawl, and where the past can linger like a phantom. And in 1995, this vast expanse swallowed a man whole. Frank Baker was a familiar face in his small Nevada town. A salesman by trade, he possessed a natural charisma, a ready smile, and a genuine warmth that endeared him to almost everyone he met. He was the kind of guy who remembered your name, who asked about your family, and who always seemed to have a positive outlook, even on the toughest days. He wasn't a man of extravagant wealth or extraordinary ambition, but he was a man of simple pleasures, content with his life, his friends, and his family. Frank's life revolved around his work, a steady routine of driving from town to town, meeting with clients, and closing deals. His sales territory spanned a wide swathe of Nevada, a landscape dotted with small towns and sprawling ranches. Each week, he'd pack his trusty sedan, a thermos of coffee, and a stack of paperwork, and set off on his rounds. It was a life of long hours and lonely roads, but Frank took pride in his work and enjoyed the independence it afforded him. In the spring of 1995, Frank embarked on yet another routine business trip. His itinerary was meticulously planned, each stop carefully scheduled. He had appointments lined up in several small towns scattered across the northern part of the state. The details were mundane, almost achingly ordinary: a meeting with a hardware store owner in Winnemucca, a presentation to a group of ranchers near Elko, a quick stop at a supply warehouse in Battle Mountain. The last confirmed sighting of Frank Baker was a phone call he made to his wife from a roadside diner just outside of Reno. He told her about his day, the clients he had met, and the deals he had closed. He sounded cheerful, optimistic, and completely unaware that his life was about to take a terrifying turn. He mentioned that he was looking forward to coming home the following evening. It was a typical conversation, filled with the small details of everyday life, a conversation that would later haunt his wife's dreams. The first sign that something was amiss came the following morning. Frank failed to arrive at his scheduled appointment with the hardware store owner in Winnemucca. His calls went straight to voicemail. Initially, it was dismissed as a simple oversight, a minor delay. Perhaps he had been held up by traffic, or maybe he had simply forgotten to update his schedule. But as the hours ticked by, and Frank remained unreachable, a growing sense of unease began to creep in. The initial police response was swift but limited. A missing person report was filed, and preliminary searches were conducted along Frank's intended route. Officers interviewed his family, friends, and colleagues, trying to piece together a timeline of his movements and uncover any potential leads. But the vastness of the Nevada landscape, combined with the lack of concrete evidence, made the search a daunting task. The investigation began with a sense of urgency, but the initial optimism soon faded. If you're intrigued by true crime mysteries and want to explore more perplexing disappearances, be sure to subscribe to our channel. We bring you in-depth investigations, expert analysis, and gripping narratives that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Don't miss out on our next chilling story. The initial search efforts were vast, a desperate sweep across the unforgiving Nevada terrain. Volunteers, locals who knew Frank and his easy smile, joined law enforcement, their pickups and SUVs kicking up dust devils on the lonely highways and unpaved tracks. Helicopters thrummed overhead, their pilots scanning the seemingly endless expanse of sagebrush and rock, searching for any sign of Frank or his vehicle. The sheer scale of the landscape presented a formidable challenge. Nevada, with its hidden canyons and desolate stretches, could swallow a person whole. Investigators dug into Frank's life, meticulously examining his relationships, both personal and professional. They interviewed his wife, his friends, his business associates, anyone who might offer a clue, a hint, a flicker of insight into his disappearance. Was there trouble at home? Financial difficulties? A secret affair? They left no stone unturned, pursuing every lead, no matter how improbable. His financial situation was scrutinized. Had he been in debt? Was he gambling? Had he made any enemies in his business dealings? The preliminary investigation revealed nothing significant. Frank, by all accounts, was a well-liked, stable individual. He wasn't known to have any gambling debts, and his business appeared to be thriving. Inevitably, the investigation started to produce a list of potential suspects and theories. Perhaps a disgruntled competitor, someone who resented Frank's success. Maybe a business deal gone sour, a deal that left someone feeling cheated and vengeful. There were whispers, of course, the usual rumors that swirl around any disappearance, but nothing concrete, nothing that could be definitively linked to Frank's vanishing act. One by one, these leads fizzled out, vanishing into the desert air like mirages. Each dead end deepened the frustration of the investigators and the despair of Frank's family. The initial surge of hope, fueled by the frantic search, began to wane, replaced by a gnawing sense of unease. The small Nevada community was deeply affected by Frank's disappearance. The collective anxiety was palpable. Rumors flew like tumbleweeds, each more outlandish than the last. People started locking their doors at night, a practice previously unheard of in their quiet town. The disappearance cast a long shadow, a chilling reminder of the fragility of life and the darkness that could lurk beneath the surface of even the most ordinary existence. The collective grief was heavy, a shared burden that weighed on everyone. Then came the discovery of Frank's vehicle, abandoned on a desolate stretch of highway, several miles outside of his planned route. It was a faded blue sedan, unremarkable in every way, except for the fact that it was empty. No Frank. The car's discovery amplified the mystery. The car was processed for evidence, every surface dusted for fingerprints, every inch of the interior meticulously examined. The condition of the vehicle only deepened the mystery. There were no signs of a struggle, no indication of foul play. The keys were still in the ignition, the doors unlocked. It was as if Frank had simply vanished into thin air, leaving his car behind as a haunting reminder of his absence. It raised so many unanswered questions. Where was Frank? What had happened to him? And why had he left his car in such a remote location? Time moved on, blurring the edges of the tragedy, as the vibrant hues of memory faded to a sepia-toned ache. The neon lights of Vegas continued to pulse, the desert sun beat down relentlessly, and the world kept spinning, indifferent to the void Frank Baker had left behind. The case, once a flurry of activity and desperate hope, settled into the cold, heavy silence of unsolved mysteries. The investigation slowed, then stalled. Leads dried up like puddles in the Nevada heat. Witnesses' memories, never perfect to begin with, grew unreliable with each passing year. The vibrant posters, once plastered across every gas station and diner, offering rewards for information, peeled and faded, becoming just another layer of sun-baked debris clinging to the landscape. Hope, a fragile seedling, withered under the relentless sun of uncertainty. Frank Baker became a ghost story whispered in hushed tones, a cautionary tale in a town that preferred to focus on the glitz and glamour. His name, once a familiar greeting, became a painful reminder of what was lost, a wound that refused to heal. The Baker family, however, could not afford to forget. For them, time did not dull the pain, it merely calcified it. The uncertainty was a constant torment, a gnawing question mark hanging over their lives. Every holiday, every birthday, every family gathering was a stark reminder of Frank's absence. They clung to the faintest flicker of hope, desperately seeking closure, a way to lay their loved one to rest, both physically and emotionally. They visited psychics, consulted with private investigators, and relentlessly contacted the police, pleading for any updates, any progress. The files sat in the evidence room, thick manila folders filled with reports, witness statements, and photographs, all tinged with the dust of years. The sheer volume of paper was a testament to the effort that had been expended, yet it all led to the same dead end. The case of Frank Baker, missing salesman, became just another statistic, another unsolved mystery gathering dust in the annals of Nevada law enforcement. Decades passed. Detectives retired, new technologies emerged, and the world changed beyond recognition. The Frank Baker case, however, remained stubbornly frozen in time. Then came a shift. A confluence of events, both technological and human, breathed new life into the cold case. Advancements in DNA analysis, digital forensics, and investigative techniques offered a glimmer of hope where there had been only despair. A new detective, young and eager, fresh out of the academy, was assigned to the cold case unit. He possessed a relentless curiosity and a stubborn refusal to accept defeat. He saw potential where others saw only stagnation. He requested a complete review of the Frank Baker case, determined to leave no stone unturned. At the same time, a grant program was established to fund cold case investigations across the state. This influx of resources provided the opportunity to re-examine evidence with cutting-edge technology. The dusty boxes were pulled from the shelves, the files were dusted off, and the evidence was meticulously cataloged and prepared for reanalysis. Old witness statements were revisited, financial records were scrutinized, and every piece of evidence was re-examined with a fresh perspective and new tools. It was a long shot, a gamble against the odds, but it was a chance, and that was all the Baker family needed. A potential breakthrough shimmered like a mirage on the horizon. The re-examination of the evidence focused intently on a seemingly insignificant detail, a faded receipt found tucked inside Frank's briefcase. Initially, it was dismissed as a routine expense, a lunch stop at a roadside diner miles from his usual route. But with the advent of advanced digital imaging, the almost illegible scrawl on the receipt began to yield its secrets. The date, time, and location were now undeniably clear, placing Frank several hours off schedule and in a direction opposite to his stated destination. This discrepancy, once overlooked, now screamed of a detour, a hidden meeting, a secret rendezvous. The forensic breakthrough came with the application of a new DNA analysis technique to a small bloodstain discovered on Frank's shirt, a stain too minute to analyze with the technology available in 1995. The DNA didn't match Frank's. It belonged to someone unknown, someone who had been in close proximity to him on the day he vanished. The sample was entered into the National DNA Database, and a chilling match emerged. The re-examined evidence created an undeniable link between Frank Baker and a name that had barely surfaced during the initial investigation: Robert Peterson, a local businessman with a history of shady dealings and a simmering resentment towards Frank. Peterson had been peripherally questioned in 1995, providing a flimsy alibi that placed him at a conference in a neighboring state. Robert Peterson, the man who now became the primary suspect, had known Frank for years. They were rivals, competing for contracts and clients in the same small town. But their relationship was more than just professional rivalry. There were whispers of a personal conflict, a shared interest in a woman, a business deal gone sour. Peterson's initial alibi, carefully constructed and seemingly airtight in 1995, began to unravel under the weight of the new evidence. Investigators discovered discrepancies in his travel records, inconsistencies in his expense reports, and conflicting accounts from witnesses who claimed to have seen him in town on the day of Frank's disappearance. The suspect's original alibi stated he was attending a conference. However, the conference organizers had no record of him. Credit card statements showed no transactions in the city where the conference was held. These details, when pieced together, cast a dark shadow of doubt on Robert Peterson. As the investigation intensified, law enforcement discreetly increased their surveillance of Robert Peterson. His every move was monitored, his phone calls were tapped, and his associates were interviewed. The pressure began to mount. Peterson, a man accustomed to operating in the shadows, found himself under the unrelenting glare of scrutiny. He grew increasingly paranoid, his behavior erratic. He started avoiding his usual haunts, canceling appointments, and becoming withdrawn from his family and friends. The subtle signs of stress were evident. The walls were closing in, and Robert Peterson knew it. He could feel the weight of the renewed investigation pressing down on him, threatening to expose the dark secret he had guarded for so long. The past was catching up, and the truth, buried for years in the Nevada desert, was about to be unearthed. The key piece of evidence had spoken, and the silence was about to be broken. The interrogation room was sterile, almost painfully so. The suspect, a man named Robert, sat hunched over in his chair, his eyes darting around the room, avoiding direct eye contact with the two detectives sitting across from him. The air was thick with unspoken tension, a palpable weight that pressed down on everyone present. Detective Harding, a seasoned veteran with years of experience reading people, began the questioning with a calm, almost gentle tone. He started with seemingly innocuous questions, establishing a baseline of normalcy, a conversational rhythm that he hoped would lull Robert into a false sense of security. He asked about Robert's relationship with Frank, how they knew each other, and the last time they had spoken. Robert, initially, answered readily, his voice steady, his demeanor composed. He claimed they were merely acquaintances, nothing more than casual acquaintances from around town. He said he hadn't seen Frank in years, certainly not around the time of his disappearance. Detective Miller, younger but equally astute, interjected with specific details from Frank's business trip, subtly probing Robert's knowledge of Frank's whereabouts. Robert remained unfazed, sticking to his story, his answers practiced and rehearsed. The detectives pressed on, gently at first, then with increasing intensity. They presented the inconsistencies in Robert's initial alibi, the discrepancies between his version of events and the known facts. They spoke of the vehicle, of the evidence found within, of the faint traces of something that suggested a deeper connection than Robert was willing to admit. Robert shifted uneasily in his chair, his composure starting to fray around the edges. He stammered, contradicted himself, his eyes betraying a growing sense of panic. The detectives then presented the re-examined evidence, the forensic breakthrough that linked Robert directly to Frank. The atmosphere in the room changed dramatically. The polite questioning ceased, replaced by direct accusations, pointed questions that left no room for evasion. The detectives confronted Robert with the undeniable truth, the hard evidence that shattered his carefully constructed lies. They described the DNA evidence, the trace elements, the financial records that painted a damning picture of his involvement. Robert's reaction was a mixture of denial and anger. He vehemently denied any involvement in Frank's disappearance, accusing the detectives of fabricating evidence, of railroading him based on circumstantial evidence. He became agitated, his voice rising, his hands trembling. He insisted on his innocence, protesting his innocence with increasing desperation. The detectives, however, remained calm and unwavering, their gaze fixed on Robert, their questions relentless. They subtly hinted at the psychological tactics at play, the art of drawing out the truth through carefully chosen words, through understanding the human mind and its vulnerabilities. They exploited Robert's growing unease, his internal conflict, the weight of the truth that was slowly crushing him. They played on his emotions, his fears, his insecurities. Cracks began to appear in Robert's carefully constructed facade. His denials became weaker, his justifications less convincing, his story riddled with holes. He started to sweat profusely, his breathing becoming labored, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. The detectives sensed that they were close to a breakthrough, that Robert was on the verge of confessing. He began to fidget, to avoid eye contact, to mutter under his breath. The weight of the evidence, the relentless questioning, and the psychological pressure had pushed him to the brink. He was teetering on the edge, his carefully guarded secrets about to spill forth. He looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resignation, and began to speak, his voice barely a whisper. The breaking point was almost imperceptible, a subtle shift in posture, a slight tremor in the voice. The suspect, who had maintained a steely composure for hours, suddenly seemed to deflate, the carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of the evidence and the relentless questioning. It began with a sigh, a long, drawn-out expulsion of breath that seemed to carry with it years of pent-up guilt and regret. Then, the words started to flow, hesitant at first, like a dam slowly giving way, then a torrent of confession, a flood of admissions that painted a chilling picture of the events that transpired on that fateful day in 1995. The suspect recounted the details of the crime, each word a hammer blow to the carefully constructed lies they had maintained for so long. They described the meeting with Frank Baker, the pretense of a business deal gone wrong, the escalating tension that led to a violent confrontation. The motive, they revealed, was a tangled web of jealousy and resentment, a simmering envy that had finally boiled over into an act of irreversible violence. Frank, it seemed, had unwittingly become the target of a long-held grudge, a symbol of everything the suspect felt they lacked in their own life. The details were gruesome, stark in their simplicity. A secluded stretch of highway, a brief argument, and then, a moment of uncontrolled rage. The suspect described the method, a swift and brutal act that silenced Frank forever. They revealed the location where Frank Baker had been killed, a remote spot far from the prying eyes of civilization, a place where secrets could be buried deep and forgotten. But the weight of the truth was crushing, both for the suspect and the investigators who listened intently, absorbing every word of the confession. The air in the room was thick with a sense of dread, a palpable feeling of the darkness that had consumed Frank Baker's life. The suspect, once defiant and unyielding, now sat hunched and broken, the burden of their guilt finally too heavy to bear. The confession was more than just words, it was a roadmap to the past, a key to unlocking the truth that had remained hidden for so long. It provided details that only the perpetrator could have known, intricate pieces of the puzzle that fit perfectly into the existing evidence. It corroborated the forensic findings, the witness statements, and the circumstantial clues that had haunted investigators for decades. The description of the vehicle, the specific items found inside, and the location of the body all aligned with the facts that had been painstakingly gathered over the years. With each revelation, the sense of closure grew stronger, the hope that had flickered for so long now burning brightly. Frank Baker's family, who had endured years of agonizing uncertainty, were finally on the verge of receiving the answers they so desperately sought. The community, scarred by the unsolved mystery, could finally begin to heal, knowing that justice was within reach. The weight of the unknown was finally lifting, replaced by the promise of resolution and the hope for a brighter future. The end was in sight. Following the confession, a palpable sense of purpose settled over the investigation. The suspect, finally unburdened by the weight of his secret, provided explicit instructions on where to find Frank Baker's remains. The details were chillingly precise, painting a grim picture of the events that transpired so many years ago. He described a remote location, far from the prying eyes of civilization, a place where secrets could be buried and forgotten. The search team, a mix of seasoned detectives and forensic specialists, prepared for the grim task ahead. They knew that finding Frank's remains would be a crucial step in bringing closure to his family, but they also understood the emotional toll it would take on everyone involved. The journey to the designated location was arduous, traversing rugged terrain and winding through desolate landscapes. The remoteness of the area was striking, a stark reminder of the isolation Frank must have experienced in his final moments. As they approached the site, a palpable tension filled the air. The team meticulously scanned the area, their eyes searching for any sign of disturbed earth or unnatural formations. After hours of painstaking searching, they finally found it, a shallow grave hidden beneath a thicket of thorny bushes. The discovery was met with a somber silence, a moment of profound respect for the life that had been so brutally taken. The process of exhuming the remains was conducted with the utmost care and precision. Forensic anthropologists meticulously documented every detail, carefully collecting any evidence that might shed light on the circumstances of Frank's death. The remains were then transported to the medical examiner's office, where a thorough forensic examination would be conducted to confirm the identity and determine the cause of death. The forensic examination confirmed what they already suspected: these were indeed the remains of Frank Baker. The examination also revealed the cause of death, providing a final, tragic piece of the puzzle. With the identity confirmed, the focus shifted to returning Frank home to his family. The process of returning Frank's remains to his family was handled with sensitivity and compassion. The detectives personally contacted the family, informing them of the discovery and offering their support during this difficult time. Arrangements were made for a proper burial, a final resting place where Frank could finally be at peace. The funeral service was a moving tribute to Frank's life, attended by family, friends, and members of the community who had never forgotten him. The outpouring of grief and support was overwhelming, a testament to the impact Frank had had on the lives of so many. Stories were shared, tears were shed, and memories were cherished, as the community came together to say goodbye. The scene at the cemetery was poignant. Frank's family, finally granted the opportunity to mourn properly, stood by his graveside. The weight of years of uncertainty lifted, replaced by a grief that was both profound and cathartic. They placed flowers on his coffin, whispered words of love, and bid him a final farewell. At long last, Frank Baker was home. The cold case, once a source of endless pain and frustration, was finally closed. The formal charges against the suspect were extensive, reflecting the gravity of the crime that had haunted the community for so long. Murder, of course, topped the list, but there were also charges related to the disposal of the body, obstruction of justice, and potentially even fraud, depending on the specifics of any financial gain connected to Frank's disappearance. Each charge carried the weight of years, decades even, of unanswered questions and suppressed grief. The arrest itself was a carefully orchestrated event. After the confession, there was no doubt, but the authorities still proceeded with methodical precision. A warrant was obtained, and the suspect was taken into custody without incident at their home. The quiet, almost anticlimactic nature of the arrest stood in stark contrast to the years of uncertainty and the violent act that had precipitated it all. The initial court appearance was a whirlwind of legal formalities. The suspect, looking pale and drawn, was informed of the charges against them. A plea was entered, not guilty, as expected, and the wheels of the legal system began to grind. The bail hearing was the first real battleground. The prosecution argued vehemently against bail, citing the severity of the crime, the risk of flight, and the potential danger to the community. They presented evidence from the confession, emphasizing the premeditation and the callousness of the act. The defense countered by attacking the validity of the confession, suggesting it was coerced or unreliable. They argued that the suspect had been under duress during the interrogation and that the evidence was circumstantial. They painted a picture of a respected member of the community, wrongly accused after all these years. The judge, after hearing both sides, ultimately denied bail, deeming the suspect a flight risk and a danger to the community. The community's reaction to the arrest was a complex mix of emotions. Shock was perhaps the most prevalent. Many found it difficult to reconcile the image they had of the suspect with the horrific act they were accused of committing. Relief was another common sentiment. After so many years of uncertainty, there was finally a sense that justice might be served. But there was also anger, a deep-seated rage at the betrayal and the years of suffering that had been inflicted on Frank's family. The media coverage exploded. National news outlets picked up the story, drawn by the decades-old mystery and the shocking resolution. The small Nevada town was thrust into the spotlight, its secrets laid bare for the world to see. As the media delved deeper, details about the suspect's past began to emerge. Whispers of past transgressions, questionable business dealings, and a history of strained relationships surfaced. While none of it was directly related to the Frank Baker case, it painted a picture of a more complex and potentially troubled individual than many had initially perceived. A sense of justice, however tentative, began to settle over the community. The arrest was not the end of the story, but it was a crucial step. The legal process was just beginning, but for the first time in decades, there was a glimmer of hope that Frank Baker and his family would finally receive the justice they deserved. The long shadow of uncertainty was slowly beginning to recede, replaced by the promise of accountability and closure. The community watched, waited, and hoped. Word count equals 667. The pretrial motions were a flurry of legal maneuvering. The defense team, sharp and well-prepared, filed motion after motion, attempting to suppress key pieces of evidence. They argued that the confession, the cornerstone of the prosecution's case, was obtained through coercive tactics, rendering it inadmissible. They claimed the detectives had worn down their client, manipulating him into confessing to a crime he did not commit. The prosecution, equally resolute, countered each argument with meticulous detail, presenting legal precedents and expert testimony to validate the evidence. They argued that the confession was freely given, the product of a man wrestling with his conscience, not a victim of police manipulation. The defense also sought a change of venue, arguing that the intense media coverage had poisoned the well, making it impossible to find an impartial jury in the small Nevada community. The prosecution vehemently opposed this, insisting that a fair and unbiased jury could be selected, one that would weigh the evidence objectively, irrespective of the media frenzy. The judge, a seasoned veteran of the bench, carefully considered each motion, weighing the arguments and the potential impact on the fairness of the trial. He ruled against the motion to suppress the confession, finding that it was indeed admissible. He also denied the motion for a change of venue, confident that an impartial jury could be impaneled. Jury selection was a grueling process, a delicate dance of legal strategy and human intuition. The prosecution and the defense meticulously questioned potential jurors, probing their backgrounds, their beliefs, and their attitudes towards the case. They sought to identify any biases, any preconceived notions that might sway their judgment. The process was slow, painstaking, and emotionally charged, as both sides battled for every seat on the jury. Finally, after days of intense scrutiny, a jury of 12 was selected, a group of individuals deemed capable of rendering a fair and impartial verdict. The trial began with opening statements, the prosecution laying out their case, painting a vivid picture of Frank Baker, the hard-working salesman, and the man who coldly took his life. They promised to present compelling evidence, including forensic analysis, witness testimony, and the defendant's own words, to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he was guilty of murder. The defense, in their opening statement, acknowledged the tragedy of Frank Baker's disappearance but cautioned the jury against rushing to judgment. They argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that the confession was unreliable, and that there were other possible explanations for what happened to Frank Baker. The prosecution's case unfolded with methodical precision. They presented forensic evidence linking the defendant to the crime scene, DNA evidence found in Frank Baker's car, and fibers from his clothing discovered at the defendant's home. They called witnesses who testified to the defendant's animosity towards Frank Baker, his financial struggles, and his suspicious behavior in the days following the disappearance. The key witness was, of course, the detective who had taken the defendant's confession, recounting the details of that fateful interrogation, the moment when the defendant finally broke down and admitted his guilt. The defense rigorously cross-examined each prosecution witness, attempting to poke holes in their testimony, to cast doubt on their credibility, to create reasonable doubt in the minds of the jurors. They challenged the accuracy of the forensic evidence, questioned the motives of the witnesses, and suggested that the detective had coerced the confession. They sought to undermine the prosecution's narrative, to plant seeds of uncertainty, to persuade the jury that the evidence was not as conclusive as it seemed. The prosecution, however, skillfully rebutted each challenge, reinforcing their narrative, strengthening their case, and building a compelling picture of guilt. The defense, however, had a different story to tell. Their strategy hinged on casting doubt on the prosecution's seemingly airtight case. They aimed to chip away at the foundation of the evidence, planting seeds of uncertainty in the minds of the jurors. The defense attorney, a seasoned veteran with a reputation for courtroom theatrics, began by meticulously dissecting the confession. He argued that it had been coerced, obtained under duress during a grueling interrogation. He suggested that Frank, exhausted and vulnerable, might have simply told the detectives what they wanted to hear to escape the pressure. Then came the defense witnesses. They presented a carefully curated selection of individuals who offered alternative perspectives on Frank's disappearance. A former business partner testified about Frank's risky financial ventures, hinting at the possibility of gambling debts or shady dealings that could have led to his demise. A local woman claimed to have seen Frank arguing with an unknown man at a truck stop a week before he vanished, suggesting the involvement of someone else entirely. These testimonies, while circumstantial, were designed to muddy the waters and create reasonable doubt. The defense also launched a direct attack on the forensic evidence. They questioned the accuracy of the DNA analysis, pointing out potential errors in the lab procedures. They brought in their own expert witness, a renowned forensic scientist, who testified that the evidence could have been contaminated or misinterpreted. He suggested that the traces of Frank's blood found in the suspect's car could have been transferred accidentally, perhaps during a car repair or a shared ride. Adding another layer of complexity, the defense introduced alternative theories about Frank's disappearance. They suggested that he might have run away to start a new life, tired of his mundane existence and yearning for adventure. They presented evidence of Frank's interest in foreign travel and his secret savings account, implying that he had the means and the motivation to disappear voluntarily. They even hinted at the possibility of a witness protection program, suggesting that Frank might have been involved in a criminal investigation and had been relocated for his safety. Throughout the trial, the defense hammered home the theme of reasonable doubt. They argued that the prosecution had failed to prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt, that there were too many unanswered questions and conflicting pieces of evidence. They urged the jurors to consider the possibility that someone else was responsible for Frank's disappearance, or that Frank was still alive somewhere, living under an assumed identity. As the trial drew to a close, both the prosecution and the defense delivered their closing arguments. The prosecution reiterated its case, emphasizing the overwhelming evidence of guilt and the devastating impact of the crime on Frank Baker's family. The defense, in a passionate and persuasive speech, reminded the jurors of their duty to protect the innocent and to acquit the defendant if they had any lingering doubts about his guilt. Finally, the judge instructed the jury on the law and sent them to deliberate. The fate of the accused now rested in their hands. The courtroom held its breath as the jury filed out, leaving behind an atmosphere of tense anticipation. The trial, a culmination of years of investigation and legal maneuvering, had reached its climax. The jurors were left to decide whether to condemn or exonerate the man accused of taking Frank Baker from his life. The jury began their deliberations, the weight of their decision heavy on their shoulders. The tension in the air was palpable as everyone waited. The courtroom felt smaller, the silence amplifying every rustle and cough. Outside, the Nevada sun beat down, but inside, a chill had settled deep in the bones of those present. It was a waiting game, a test of endurance, a collective holding of breath. Frank Baker's family, who had endured decades of uncertainty and grief, sat huddled together, their faces etched with a mixture of hope and dread. The defendant, a man who had once seemed an ordinary member of the community, now sat rigidly, his gaze fixed on some unseen point in the distance. He appeared smaller now, the weight of the accusations having visibly diminished him. The jury had been deliberating for what felt like an eternity. Hours had stretched into days, and the waiting had become almost unbearable. Every whispered conversation, every open door, sent a jolt of anticipation through the room. The lawyers paced nervously, reviewing their notes, second-guessing their strategies, and wondering if they had done enough. The court staff moved with a practiced calm, but their eyes betrayed the same anxiety that gripped everyone else. Finally, a hush fell over the room. A court officer stepped forward and announced that the jury had reached a verdict. The words hung in the air, electrifying the atmosphere. All eyes turned toward the jury box as the jurors filed in, their faces inscrutable. The judge, his expression grave, asked the foreman to read the verdict. The foreman, his voice trembling slightly, stood and delivered the words that would change lives forever. The foreman announced that the jury had reached a verdict. The clerk took the paper and handed it to the judge, who looked at it, adjusted his glasses and handed it back to the clerk to read it aloud. Every heart in the room seemed to stop. The clerk began to read slowly. The silence was deafening. Each word weighed heavily, carrying the culmination of years of investigation, pain, and hope. Guilty. A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Frank Baker's family erupted in tears of relief and vindication. The defendant remained stoic, his face betraying no emotion. The weight of the evidence, the compelling testimony, and ultimately, the confession, had convinced the jury beyond a reasonable doubt. Justice, after so many years, had finally been served. The feeling in the room was a potent mix of relief, sadness, and closure. While this verdict could never bring Frank back, it did provide his family with a sense of peace, knowing that his killer would finally be held accountable. The long nightmare was finally over. But there was also a deep sadness, a recognition of the profound loss that Frank's family had suffered and the years of pain that could never be erased. The judge then thanked the jury for their service and dismissed them. He would set a date for sentencing. The immediate aftermath of the trial was a whirlwind of activity. Reporters swarmed the courtroom, eager to capture the reactions of those involved. Frank Baker's family spoke briefly to the media, expressing their gratitude to law enforcement in their hope that this verdict would bring some measure of peace to their lives. The defendant was led away in handcuffs, his fate now sealed. The trial was over, but the story would live on. The trial concluded, the verdict delivered. Whether guilty or not, the echoes of the courtroom faded, but the story didn't end there. It seeped into the very fabric of the small Nevada community, forever altering its landscape. For Frank Baker's family, the legal proceedings marked a chapter's close, but the book of their grief was far from finished. The process of healing began, a slow and arduous climb out of the abyss of loss. Each family member navigated this new reality differently. Some sought solace in shared memories, poring over old photographs and telling stories that kept Frank's spirit alive. Others found comfort in quiet reflection, wrestling with the lingering questions and the weight of what had been lost. There were support groups, grief counselors, and well-meaning friends, all offering a lifeline, but ultimately, the journey was a deeply personal one. The community, too, underwent a period of reflection. The details of the crime, the secrets that had been buried for so long, forced a reckoning. Trust was fractured, suspicion lingered, and neighbors looked at each other with a newfound sense of unease. But amidst the darkness, there were also glimmers of hope, acts of kindness, and a renewed commitment to community. Law enforcement, forever marked by the Baker case, re-evaluated their procedures. The success of the cold case investigation highlighted the importance of persistence, the power of forensic technology, and the value of re-examining old evidence with fresh eyes. New protocols were implemented, training programs were updated, and a renewed focus was placed on unsolved cases. The Frank Baker case became a cautionary tale, a reminder that justice, though sometimes delayed, could still be served. Frank Baker's legacy lived on in the memories of those who knew him. He was remembered as a charismatic salesman, a devoted family man, and a friend to all. His story served as a reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of cherishing every moment. Though his life was tragically cut short, his memory continued to inspire acts of kindness and compassion within the community. Despite the resolution of the case, some questions remained. Unanswered whispers, nagging doubts, and unresolved details continued to haunt the edges of the narrative. Perhaps some truths were buried too deep, or some secrets were destined to remain hidden forever. These loose ends served as a reminder that even in the pursuit of justice, complete closure is not always possible. The story of Frank Baker is a somber reflection on the enduring power of hope. It is a reminder that even in the face of tragedy, the human spirit can endure, and that even in the darkest of times, there is always the possibility of light. The vast Nevada desert, once a symbol of mystery and despair, became a testament to the resilience of the human heart, a place where even the deepest wounds could begin to heal. It demonstrated the enduring power of hope in even the face of what appears to be a hopeless case. The media played a significant role, both in the initial stages of Frank Baker's disappearance and in the eventual resolution of his cold case. In 1995, when Frank first went missing, the local news outlets quickly picked up the story. The coverage focused primarily on the mystery of his vanishing act, a seemingly ordinary salesman, driving through a familiar route, simply disappearing without a trace. Initial reports highlighted the family's distress, the police search efforts, and the community's growing concern. This early attention undoubtedly helped to raise awareness and spurred some initial leads, although none ultimately proved fruitful. The media served as a crucial tool for disseminating information, broadcasting descriptions of Frank and his vehicle, and urging anyone with information to come forward. However, as time passed and the leads dried up, the story faded from the headlines. The case, like so many others, slipped into the realm of cold cases, relegated to the back pages and forgotten by most. Years later, when new detectives took a fresh look at the file, it was the media that played a pivotal role in rekindling public interest. A local newspaper reporter, intrigued by the decades-old mystery, began digging into the case, re-interviewing witnesses, and examining old evidence. This investigative journalism reignited the spark, prompting other news outlets to revisit the story. The renewed media coverage put pressure on law enforcement to dedicate resources to the case and highlighted the advancements in forensic technology that could potentially unlock new clues. The ethical line between responsible reporting and sensationalism became a prominent feature of the media's work. On one hand, the intense scrutiny helped push the investigation forward, uncovering new details and putting pressure on potential suspects. On the other, the constant attention could be intrusive, especially for Frank's family, who had already endured years of pain and uncertainty. The risk of sensationalizing the story, of focusing on the gruesome details rather than the human tragedy, was ever present. Maintaining a balance between informing the public and respecting the privacy of those affected was a constant challenge. Ultimately, the media's power to shape public perception cannot be understated. The way the story was framed, the angles that were emphasized, all contributed to how the community and the wider world viewed the case. Positive outcomes included increased public pressure on the authorities, but, on the other hand, the family of Frank Baker could have felt the weight of unwanted attention and have been re-victimized in a sense. The renewed interest in Frank's disappearance continued long after the trial. Documentaries and true crime shows further explored the details of the case, ensuring that his story would not be forgotten. This ongoing media presence also had long-term effects on the community, prompting reflection on the events of the past and the importance of justice. The psychology of such a crime is a dark and twisted path to navigate, a journey into the recesses of the human mind where logic bends and morality breaks. When we consider the offender in Frank Baker's case, we must ask ourselves what drove them to such a heinous act. Was it a slow burn of resentment, fueled by jealousy or envy of Frank's success and charisma? Or was it a sudden, impulsive act of rage, triggered by a specific event or perceived slight? Profiling the offender often involves piecing together fragments of their personality, their past experiences, and their relationships with others. Did they exhibit a pattern of manipulative behavior, a tendency to control and dominate those around them? Were there any red flags in their past, any signs of violent tendencies or a disregard for the well-being of others? These are the questions that psychologists and investigators grapple with as they attempt to understand the inner workings of a criminal mind. The motive behind the crime is often the key to unlocking the offender's psychology. In Frank Baker's case, several motives could have been at play. Perhaps it was greed, a desire to profit from Frank's business dealings or to eliminate him as a competitor. Or maybe it was jealousy, a burning resentment of Frank's popularity and success with women. The need for control can also be a powerful motivator, driving someone to eliminate anyone who threatens their sense of power or authority. Delving into the mind of a killer is a disturbing exercise, forcing us to confront the darkest aspects of human nature. It requires us to examine their personality traits, their emotional state, and their motivations with a critical eye. What were their early childhood experiences like? Did they suffer abuse or neglect? Did they witness violence or trauma? These factors can all contribute to the development of a criminal mindset. The psychological impact of the crime on Frank Baker's family is immeasurable. They are left to grapple with grief, trauma, and the agonizing search for meaning in the face of senseless violence. The sudden loss of a loved one can shatter their world, leaving them feeling lost, confused, and overwhelmed. Coping with such a profound loss requires immense strength and resilience. Understanding the cycle of violence is crucial in preventing future tragedies. Violence often begets violence, creating a destructive pattern that can perpetuate itself across generations. Addressing the root causes of crime, such as poverty, inequality, and lack of access to education and opportunity, is essential in breaking this cycle. Ultimately, a deeper understanding of the psychology of crime is necessary for creating a safer and more just society. By studying the minds of offenders, we can gain valuable insights into the factors that contribute to criminal behavior and develop effective strategies for prevention and rehabilitation. This understanding is not just about solving crimes, it's about building a world where such crimes are less likely to occur in the first place. The Frank Baker case serves as a stark reminder of several crucial lessons. First and foremost, it underscores the unwavering importance of perseverance in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. Decades passed, hope dwindled, but the commitment to uncover the truth never fully extinguished. This tenacity, fueled by the enduring love of Frank's family and the dedication of law enforcement, ultimately proved pivotal in cracking a case that had long remained dormant. The successful resolution hinged not only on relentless pursuit but also on the transformative power of forensic technology. Advancements in DNA analysis, digital forensics, and other investigative techniques played a vital role in re-examining old evidence and uncovering previously missed connections. These technological leaps provided the means to link the suspect definitively to the crime, transforming circumstantial suspicions into irrefutable proof. The Frank Baker case emphatically demonstrates the necessity of ongoing investment in and utilization of cutting-edge forensic science. Cold case investigations, as exemplified by this narrative, are not merely exercises in historical record-keeping, they are vital avenues for delivering justice to victims and their families. The passage of time may dim memories and complicate investigations, but it should never serve as a barrier to the pursuit of truth and accountability. Each cold case represents an opportunity to right a past wrong, to provide closure to those who have suffered, and to reaffirm the principle that no crime should ever go unpunished. Let us remember the victims of violent crime. Frank Baker was more than just a name in a file. He was a son, a husband, a friend, a member of a community. His life was tragically cut short, leaving an irreparable void in the lives of those who loved him. It is our collective responsibility to honor his memory, and the memories of all victims, by supporting efforts to prevent future tragedies. We must foster a culture of community vigilance, where citizens actively participate in creating safer environments and assisting law enforcement in solving crimes. The eyes and ears of a community can be invaluable assets in piecing together the puzzle of a crime, especially in cases where witnesses may be reluctant to come forward or where crucial information may have been overlooked. As we reflect on the Frank Baker case, let us carry forward the lessons learned, the importance of unwavering perseverance, the transformative power of technology, and the vital role of community vigilance. These principles, combined with compassion and a commitment to justice, can help us to create a world where fewer families have to endure the pain and uncertainty of a missing loved one. If you found this story compelling and believe in the importance of true crime investigations, please subscribe to our channel for more in-depth accounts of real-life mysteries in the pursuit of justice. And for another gripping true crime story, click on the suggested video now. Join us as we continue to explore the complexities of the human experience and the unwavering quest for truth.